recorded session. So we're going to start the recording, and absolutely delighted to have the company of you folks and to discuss Chapter 9. I'm hoping that you are as excited as I am about getting started. No other thing than moving from all the planning and doing all the other stuff to simply getting into the rhythm of making a change. So let's get to it. So welcome, and today's meeting is hosted by the Washington State Healthcare Authority, and as you are familiar, this is an interactive meeting, and certainly ask that you engage in as much discussion as we possibly can, and to participate throughout the session. And to remind you that the slides and recording will be sent by email after the presentation. I think in the chat we have added the last session's presentation and this session presentation, that if you want to follow along with that. So let's do our general housekeeping. Obviously, we expect the level of participation that is typical of this learning community. And you use the chat option and the Zoom bar to keep things moving along. Certainly we ask that, and thanks Emily for putting the call-in information in there as well, and today's presentation. As you are familiar in terms of using the Zoom option, we ask that you keep yourself muted if you're not speaking directly or responding. And we understand clearly that some people may have the option of video option, and some environments may not permit that, but as best as you can, if you're able to join by video, would be great. We certainly try to ensure that all our material is accessible as possible, and hence subtitle is available in today's session. So know that you can simply go to the three dots and access the subtitling option. So that, I hope, will provide you with as much accessibility as possible. So certainly, as we move along today, the hope is that we are going to get into the primary element of today's session, which is to really look at moving from the whole planning and evaluating state to really getting into some degree of movement in the direction of change. So today's session, once again, is focused on sorting and removing stuff, and we're in the getting ready stage. So I'm hoping that everyone can really get into that. And good morning to you, Carol. So, as we would typically ask folks to review our last month's material, and in doing so, I'm going to try to access the poll so that we can get a review of the July elements. I'm hoping that you had a chance to possibly try the learning application from July, which includes my acquiring form. You explore recent acquiring episodes, also the advantages and disadvantages worksheet, and the non-acquiring help card. So I would like to get a sense from you as to how that went. And in doing so, I'm going to ask that we use the poll option to really review. So I'm going to launch a poll to review the July material, and I'll ask if you can certainly provide us some feedback to give me a sense as to whether or not you had a chance to try that and how did that go. Did you attend last month's meeting? And if you did you try the learning applications? So I'll give you a few seconds to get into that. Provide us with as much information as possible. So far, it looks like a few folks said. And then most of the folks did not so far attend last month's meeting, but I'll give another 5 seconds and then we'll look at the results and get a sense as to where we are. Okay. All right, so let's look at the results. So the question is, did you attend last month's meeting? A little below half of you said yes. A great deal of folks didn't, so hopefully we'll get a chance to review the learning applications and really get into the mode. If you attended, did you try or share the following? The majority of you haven't tried those options yet. And for some folks, it's not applicable, but we've had a few folks who did try the My Acquiring form, as well as the Exploring Recent Acquiring episodes. And if you tried them, how did it go? 6% of folks said generally helpful, somewhat helpful. So for those who did try it, can you give me a sense as to how it went? How did you see it? Did you see it as helpful? In what way did it help? And what was the takeaway? And here's an option you can either share that. So Teresa said, I tried to get in and got the notification that Zoom needed to be updated. Okay, that's all right. Yes, that's kind of classic. Carol said I could not submit an answer. Would not let me freeze. Okay. Kimberly said, could I get last month's attachment of materials? That is posted in the chat if you can follow along. So if you haven't had a chance, and it seems like the majority of folks haven't had a chance to really try the learning application and the stuff, you certainly have the option to do so throughout the coming weeks and the rest of the month. But I really encourage you to try them because, as you know, the expectation here is, or the goal here is for us to really engage with the material and see what feedback and bring it back to the forum so we can really have a discourse as to how it went and how we see it applicable. Because at the end of the day, it's about how does this apply to what we do in the field in order to benefit the folks who are on the receiving end of our services, or those who are really working through the process of reducing, acquiring, and really managing their possessions. So once again, it's absolutely fine. Please remember that you have the opportunity to continue. Melody, go right ahead.
Good morning. So I just got back from about a week and a half vacation, and I am very pleased to say I did not buy any touristy crap to bring home with me and clutter up my house.
Fantastic. That's one of those things where it's a rare time to say, yes, that's a good thing. You spend the time actually experiencing the vacation, not worrying about tokens to reflect what you did do.
Even when we were in shops, I would think to myself, is this something you really need? You know, and then think about other things I bought in the past that just either get given away or thrown away or donated. And so this has really helped me keep that awareness in my mind.
Fantastic. It sounds as though you did try the advantages, disadvantages form in terms of really looking at, is it something that you need? Do you have something like that? What's the advantages and disadvantages of acquiring that stuff? So great job, Melody.
Absolutely.
I am definitely enjoying the vacation. You look like you came back from vacation. You have that smile on your face. Keep it. We all can live through you for a moment. So there you go. Go ahead, Debbie.
I just wanted to say that I found those tools very helpful. And I have trouble. I live in a two-bedroom condo, and the second bedroom is like, I don't have a garage. So it's my garage, my storage, my office, my library. Well, it was a mess, and it's embarrassing to me because I used to work with the clutter hoarding program, but as a peer support. So, you know, it's par for the course. But anyway, it really helped me. I got things off the floor, and they're contained in some boxes. And now I bought clear boxes. And so I see light at the end of the tunnel.
Fantastic, Debbie.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, we're all illuminating that light. Great for you. And I think you're kind of ahead of us, because we're getting into that mode of how you do that, how you sustain that. So I'm really delighted for you, but I'm glad to hear that you are not just feeling good about where you are, but you have that sense as to how you got there and what is going to keep you moving in that direction and moving forward. So,
and you know, Earl, I'm kind of at a different point in life than a lot of people taking this course, in that I'm kind of looking ahead, because my mother is in a independent living place, and I can't afford some of these places in San Diego. So I have to downsize in order to move to a place. You know, I'm only 72, but you know, you never know what the future holds, and I don't want to, you know, go through it before I move somewhere. You know what I mean?
Yes, that absolutely makes sense. And you may be surprised how much that resonates with more of us than you. Exactly. Because I like the way you put it, Debbie. I am only 72. Isn't that delightful? That's delightful. But I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. But that's a great thought, you know, forum in terms of thinking, not just where you are now, but how what you do now is going to impact the future in terms of your livelihood and wellness and the options that you have. So fantastic. I am geeked today. You guys have me really up and excited as already. So that's great. So thank you all for sharing. So kind of want to get into what we're going to do today and what we're going to focus on. Obviously, you know, we're talking about getting ready and getting into that readiness to change that whole motivational area and scope. But I want to really focus succinctly on what we're going to focus on. So we're going to want to recognize some of the common challenges to getting started. Really, how do you get from that whole planning, getting your mind right, to really taking action to get things moving? So we're going to look at what are some of the common challenges to that. And then we're going to examine the guidelines for problem solving. Because as we know, all the best laid plans, right? We can have all things set up magnificently, and then we have things that we can either plan for and predict, or things that just occur that we haven't predicted or even planned for. So really examine, how do we problem solve when those obstacles arise? And then outlining strategies for actual sorting and organizing, really getting into that methodology, that whole approach to doing it. And last but not least, but just as critical, in the, you know, finding steps to make sure that this is all rewarding. Because if we're just doing this with the hope that something is going to change and sustain change, we have to make sure that we are incentivized and rewarded for every single little effort and movement towards our goals. Because we want to keep ourselves motivated in the realm of doing things. So that's our objective of today. And I want to make sure that we stay on track as best as we can. So as we know, we are in the getting ready stage. And that generally has a lot to do with how we perceive change as a continuum. And I know for most of us, you know, we've likely come across this whole concept of the change continuum and the stages of change. And we want to look at where we are in this process. Where in that stage of change are we in this process? Because we're assuming that we're just about ready to tackle the task of sorting, organizing, and removing stuff. And therefore, really having a sense as to where we are and where we're going in that whole change process really helps us to not only understand clearly what the expectations are and what some of the challenges are, but how we move progressively through that process or navigate that process. So in terms of the stages of change, we are likely really taking a look at where we are in between that action phase and that preparation stage. And I want to kind of take this opportunity to jump in, and you'll find me doing that more and more, really getting into what's your perspective about it, so that I'm ensuring that you are joining me in this process. And I just don't want to just give information. I want you to be actively involved in that process. So I'm going to ask you to respond to this poll to give me a sense as to how you see this particular process, this particular stage, as it relates to the stages of change. So if you can respond to the poll questions, it will really give me a sense so that we're really clear on where we are and where we need to go. So the first question is, what stage of change in that trans-theoretical model is aligned with getting ready? Since that's the subject of today's session, really that getting ready. So take a moment or so to really just kind of give me some feedback as to how you see today's endeavor, this chapter's focus as it relates to the stages of change. Okay, so we'll take another 5 seconds. And if anyone, and we'll talk some more about that, if anyone is not familiar with the stages of change, I certainly want to give a kind of quick overview so that I'm not assuming things not in evidence, right? Okay, so let's see where things are. Share the results. So the first question is, what stage of change in the trans-theoretical model, and that's the model of the stages of change, is aligned with today's endeavor, that whole getting ready? And half of you said preparation. A good quarter of folks said contemplation, and we had some people who said pre-contemplation, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because I want people to kind of open their minds as to where we see ourselves, because sometimes we can be in between stages of change, and it's not so much as to where we are in that process, but how we see ourselves and what our understanding is as to what that particular stage of change requires. So for this particular stage or chapter that we're focusing on, it's more related to that preparation and slightly into that action mode. So, but it's primarily preparation, and we'll see some evidence to support that. So which evidence-based practices or interventions are really recommended for this stage? And a number of folks said outreach. A greater number of folks said motivation and education. And yes, when we're talking about people being ready, getting all that motivation going, understanding the value of what we do, the intervention should really be focused on that motivation and education elements or interventions. That's not to say that the others, like skill building, is not applicable. It's just primarily focused on motivation and education. Then why is it beneficial to build rewards into your sorting and removing? Most of you said rewards can reinforce good behavior and promote behavioral change. Absolutely. And it's funny because I put in that first response because I wanted to get a sense of folks. Like, we cannot accomplish any task without rewards. For some people, they can't. So I am not even going to say that that is not okay. For some people, they need that reward in order to be motivated to change. But primarily, it really reinforces good behavior and get us motivated to move in that change direction. I'm sorry, James, it will not let you submit your answer. In that case, you can simply just give me the answer in the chat. I apologize. I don't know if it's your particular your agency's Zoom account. I'm not certain. I really wish I had the answer, but please provide that in the chat. So as we note here, the focus of today is really around the determination of preparation mode. So that's important to know. And for us, it may be why is that so? Really, the preparation or determination stage of change, particularly as it relates to acquiring or hoarding, is really deciding to address that hoarding problem, which is the hallmark of this stage of change, right? We've weighed the pros and cons, all the risk and reward analysis has been done prior, and finally we tip the balance in favor of change. We're committed, we're confident, we're ready to make that change. Even though not all the ambivalence about making that change has been resolved, but we really are in that place where we want to take action. We want to see what our action is going to result in. So oftentimes individuals in this stage of change appear to be ready and committed. So that's where we are. So the question then is commitment to change enough to make a realistic plan? Because we need a plan moving forward. But just being committed to making that change as aligned with preparation, is that enough for us to actually do what we need to do to see the change in living colors? That's the question I have for you. Is just the commitment enough to make a realistic plan? Or do we need more than just commitment? Indeed, Morgan. Commitment is not enough. Carol talks about accountability. Morgan talks about you need motivation and support. Sarah Lynn talks about commitment is important, but encouragement also helps.
And I think
Melody.
Sorry, and I think it depends on the person. What works for one doesn't necessarily work for another.
Absolutely. And the degree, what it takes to motivate someone or what motivates that person is different, can certainly be different and individualized. But ultimately, as we will process more today, we have to move from the motivation and that state of readiness to actually taking action. And in order to do that, we have to have a plan, some kind of plan that guides us to give us a sense as to where we're going, how we're going to get there, and how do we know when we get there. That's what the plan should really facilitate. And that's important. So when we think of moving from that preparation stage to the action stage, moving from that commitment to taking action to actually actively taking steps to make that change, but we're not yet stable. That's the action stage. So we have to know what's ahead of us. So that's what's ahead of us. When we really get into that mode of making the change and then sustaining it so that we can bear dividends and get the benefits from doing so. So it's important for us to understand that clearly. And Robin says, need short-term goals. And Sarah Lynn says, I can be committed to change, but input from others was needed to make me make a plan. Absolutely. So you need some input and insight in that area. So what are the strategies for shifting from the preparation stage to the actual action stage? What are the recommended strategies? What are the tested strategies? What have people done that has worked to move them from that preparation to action stage? Because in knowing that, we get a sense as to whether or not we're equipped to do that, We have the resources to do that. We have the knowledge to do that. We have the skills to do that. So what are some of the strategies? We talk about clarifying a person's own goal and the strategies for change. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And what strategies are you aiming to take on? As providers, we are expected to offer a menu of change options, right? I think Melody spoke about that. People have different ways of doing things. People have different ways of seeing success, of approaching the element. So we have to offer a number of different options, because if you offer one option to change and that does not work for that person, that's a stalemate, and we don't want to be in that situation. And to elicit that change strategy from the consumer, we want to hear that person speaking it into existence, processing it in their minds. And then consider lowering the barriers to change. What are some of the obstacles that we need to address? We need to think about. We need to begin to plan to manage. And that will then help that person determine whether or not they need the supports that you're talking about. And what would that support look like? What are some of the natural supports that need to be enlisted in order to support us as we move forward? And then really explore treatment expectations for the client's role. What are some of the tested, proven strategies that are going to be put in place to help and sustain that person's movement in that direction? So these are some of the strategies to really shift into action, from preparation into action. And that's important to note. But as we know, no good thing comes without a challenge, right? No viable, feasible goal attainment comes without challenge. And some of those challenges are actually known, and some of them can come out of the shadows. So for those that we know, we have to kind of begin to think about and process and plan for. As we know, and that was stated quite clearly in the text, motivation and commitment to change can be a challenge. It's an obstacle in itself. Is change possible? And is change in my best interest? Because when it comes to acquiring, there's always that uncertainty and ambivalence about whether or not getting that new, shiny, or valued thing is really significant and important to us. We have to kind of consistently process things as we move along. You know, not because we reach that stage with a certain situation, it's going to be salient for every situation we come across. Because I can tell you from my own experience, you know, sometimes that Clark's boot that I see, I really have a tremendous struggle determining whether or not it should come home with me. You know, whether or not this version of gray is different than the one I have. And how am I distinguishing that the sole of this one, the rubber sole, is going to somehow, you know, make me walk with a better bounce and stride than the leather sole? I have to kind of keep processing that as I go along. And I'm sure in your own personal way, there's a tremendous amount of examples of that. And the readiness to make the desired change. Having the mindset that I'm ready to do it, but really seeing my readiness laid out in a plan is another thing. You know, do I possess the knowledge, skills, and resources necessary to succeed? Do I have a developed plan that is going to guide me, that is going to allow me to navigate the obstacles? Can I identify and deal with anticipated barriers? Do I even know an obstacle when I see it? And when I see it to know it, how do I address it? So Robin talks about you add serious mental illness or other barriers to the hoarding behavior. It makes it harder to identify how to help individuals and make a plan for change. Absolutely, it does. There's a lot of other comorbidities or other variables that we always consistently have to deal with. But it should prompt us to even become more focused on a plan that's realistic, that's attainable, that is really measured. So that's going to be the task, obviously.
I like in the book, just they have so many different creative ways of, getting past some of these barriers.
Absolutely. And as we know, the book is a great guide, but we know we live in a world that just has some unique obstacles to come, whether it's something out of the blue or whether it's something in our, life that changes, beyond our state of readiness to manage it. So we always have to be constantly in that mode. And Carol asked, what is SMI? SMI is one of the acronyms for severe mental illness. And we've heard different acronyms, persistent. So glad that we were able to clarify that for each one. Because once again, we can't assume that everyone is, working in mental health services. So it's sometimes unfamiliar for folks. So it's important as well that once we begin to work with folks, and I think you just mentioned that we're matching the appropriate interventions. What we're going to do really matches that person's stage of change. And there is a good guide in terms of what stage of change is aligned or what interventions is appropriate to align with specific stages of change. So as you see here, if someone is in pre-contemplation, really not seeing that problem or not considering making a change, as we talked about in earlier chapters, then we talk about outreaching and supporting that person and really helping that person with harm reduction. In case of an inspection, make sure there's an exit and make sure there's certain things. But as we get to this stage where that person is already acknowledged and the issue, analyzed the need to do the thing, ready to make the change, and they're in the preparation mode, we ought to be looking at what specific interventions are associated with that. And I think in the poll, a number of you mentioned what's the appropriate interventions, and they're really focused on motivation and education. For someone in this stage of change, really sustaining the motivation and moving people in that direction is really the most tested and approved and viable interventions. And as people get into the action stage where you're trying to sustain and keep the possessions in good order, we are talking about building skills and some really substantial cognitive behavioral strategies that would help that person process negative thoughts and negative emotions related to their efforts to keep things under control. So that's important to understand that in this particular stage, we're really looking at motivation and education as the interventions. So with that in mind, it's important for us to even consider deciding the person deciding to make the change is worth it. Because we can hear coming from other folks outside of ourselves that, managing your possessions and ensuring that there's a sense of order and guidance so you can access your possessions, so you can live in a safe environment and free of obstacles and rodents and other such things that are going to impact our daily functioning. It is still important for us to determine whether it's worth it in this moment to take action or to move towards action. So it's not whether or not it is merely important for that person to understand changing their hoarding behaviors, but it's whether or not it's worth it now. Putting my energies and resources in it now, is it important? And we use a tool, an assessment tool called a decisional balance or a payoff matrix to help people process through that uncertainty or to really get a sense as to whether or not that's the appropriate thing for them to do in the here and now. So how do we use the decisional balance? We look at the benefits or the pros and the cost of making any change. So one of the things that I consistently remind folks is that every change that we make, even if it's a positive change, you can gain something from that change, but you also have to remember that typically with change, you will lose something. And it may not be evident what you're losing. This particular assessment really helps us to look at it from that perspective. So in terms of making a change, let's think change of, organizing and sorting our materials or our possessions. Not making the change. We don't have to put all that energy into organizing, right? So we have more free time. And in not making the change, we're also protected from feeling the overwhelmment that come with trying to make that change. So we're not overwhelmed. So the benefits of not making the change is more time for ourselves to do what we want, and not having to feel that sense of overwhelmment and disappointment and failure. In the same mode, though, if we don't make the change, we also are aware that the cost of not making that change is that our possessions remain disorganized. We may be unable to easily access those possessions. And then there's a tremendous amount of stress that comes with that obstacle standing in the way of our daily function, whether it's moving from one room to the next, whether it's getting through our home, whether it's being safe, whether it's maintaining a good egress and an exit, whether it's a matter of determining whether or not we can actually move into the next stage of our lives and the next accommodations with the possessions that are going to be accommodated, and whether or not we can financially manage that, as we've talked about earlier. So it's important to look at the pros and cons of making the change or not making the change. So what about making a change? What is the benefits of making the change? By doing so, we really organize our possessions. We sort it, we organize it, it's easily accessible. Oftentimes our home does not become a place that is difficult to manage and negotiate. We're able to function in our daily living activities in a desired way. But even if we make the change, what is going to be the cost of making that change? There's going to be a pervasive degree of stress associated with maintaining that organization. And as we know, as we organize and sort stuff, we may have to consider discarding some of our possessions, and that's a challenge. And then we have the ultimate fear of relapsing, things going back to the way they were, and we're feeling like we can't sustain that change. So this is a very good tool if you're dealing with a consumer or a family member or a loved one who, even when they get to this stage, still have some uncertainty about whether or not making that change is worth it. You can really help that person process the benefits and shortcomings of making that change. So there's readiness for change as well, which is important, which is another tool for us to really look at when we're trying to sort out whether or not we should be making that change. The person's understanding about the importance of making that change, their confidence in making that change, and their readiness to make that change. And there's an assessment tool called a Readiness Rule that we can use to really help someone in that process of analyzing where they are in terms of their confidence, their importance, and the readiness to make that change. A typical question we ask someone is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, not ready, 10 being chomping at the bit, how confident are you in making that change? And the person may say, well, I'm probably at a 5. And, you ask, instead of asking a person why they're not at a 6 immediately, you ask them, well, it's great. You want to motivate the person. You said, well, that's great to hear. Tell me, why are you not at a 4? Then that person can give you the positive inference, like, okay, I'm not at a 4 because A, B, C, D. So by doing so, you're giving that person a sense that they could have been at a 4, now they're at a 5. So they're at a progressive movement. And then you then assess, well, what would it take for you to then get to a 6, maybe? And then you process that with that person, help that person see what's the next step. So you do that in all those areas, in terms of confidence, in terms of importance, and in terms of readiness. And it really gives that person a good scope, a good image of where they are in terms of their readiness to change. So I'm hoping that you can use that tool if someone is stuck in that mode. And then we ultimately have what we're going to talk about, really the change plan. What is the plan? And there's a change plan worksheet that you can use in that element. And it really gets down to the nuts and bolts of making those changes. What are the changes I want to make or continue making? And the reason why I want to make those changes are the steps I'm going to take in making those changes. I will know that my plan is working if, and what will I do if the plan isn't working? So these are some concrete elements that we'll be looking at when we're using this particular worksheet to help someone really plan out their change as they move forward. So now that we're certain that that person is really ready, confident, and it's important for them to make the change, everything is where it needs to be, we have to look at developing a practice muscle. And for those who are familiar with the reference, you'll remember what the practice muscle is, or what the practice muscle really, the process really is. So when we talk about our practice model, and I don't know if anyone is familiar with the practice muscle. Can anyone tell me what the practice muscle is and how do you use that in this process? What does it require when we say we are developing our practice muscle?
Well, from my understanding, it requires starting out slow, building in increments over time.
Perfect. Couldn't say it better, Melody. You're right on top of it. It's that concept of, like you said, really starting slow, developing that, that mojo, so to speak, getting into that rhythm, and then consistently moving progressively forward. So when we talk about it, your goal is really to get that 30 to 60 minutes in a day of really sorting and organizing. But you can't start there, because you don't start at the finish line, right? You start in the starting blocks. Hence the picture, you start in the starting blocks. So if you can only do 5 minutes, you do it for a few days. Then you move up to 10 minutes. Then the next week you increase to 15 to 20 minutes, and you keep increasing up to 30 minutes. And then with that level of confidence, you then move towards 60 minutes. And then you can see tangible progress because you have climbed that ladder. So that's what we talk about when we speak to the practice muscle, really getting that muscle accustomed to the tension and that real effort that it takes to get to that point where you have a certain duration that you're going to insist on. Because as we know, when it comes to sorting and organizing, it really takes a tangible amount of time to really make progress. It's hard to do in just 5-minute increments. You have to have some ability to really engage it for a certain period of time to get the benefits of it. So that's the practice muscle. So, and we know, as we've talked about, some of the challenges, staying focused and managing distractions. And Bill had, if you read the book, Bill had some major issues around, delaying distractibility and really keeping things out of the head so you can stay focused on the task. And Bill gives some great examples as to what worked for him. And I want people to explore what may work for them. Bill talked about using a timer with an alarm to help him staying on task for a determined time. So if you're going to do 15 minutes, you put a timer for 15 minutes, press that timer, and then you get into your mode. And what we find more often than not is when that timer go off, we tend to look at it like, should I snooze it and keep on working, or should I stop and feel accomplished, right? But you can make that choice. But it's a great way to get started, particularly as you develop your practice muscle. And you reduce its distraction. For me, I know I couldn't sort and organize if the TV was on, and ESPN was on, or Diners, Dining, and Dives, the food. I get distracted. I'm just being honest about it. And I think for most of us, there is something that we know we cannot maintain our focus if it's happening at the same time. With Bill, he was just turn off the TV, silence the cell phone. Think of it. For a number of folks, if you hear ding and that text come on, forget sorting and organizing. You're responding like, what's happening in the world that I'm missing in this 15 minutes?
I like that he covered the stuff that he wasn't working on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be very helpful with somebody that I'm thinking about. And so you can only focus on one portion of what's on the table or this pile of paperwork. Let's cover half of it with a sheet. That way you won't be looking at it. You won't be distracted.
Absolutely. I think that's a phenomenal, and it's often overlooked, really removing vision of that stuff that you're not working on. because it can really take away from your sense of accomplishment. You know, if you're working on 10 pieces of paper and then there's like 100 piled in the corner, it can be overwhelming to believe that, you know, you're making progress. So it's important to also look at that as an option. And Sarah Lynn says, I find that I can work better with music playing. That's great. So if I'm organizing something, I play Pandora in the background, and the longer the music I'm listening to, the longer I'm working. That's great. That's the reverse. That's really keeping you motivated. So music is your thing, and it works for a number of people. I'm a whistler, so I'm going to be whistling through it all, and it works for me. This keeps me kind of in a tune and keep me focused. So whatever works for you. I think Bill just offered some things that work for him. He talked about using a calendar to keep track of things needed to be done and scheduling task times of the day. So that's important to note. Really scheduling things at a specific time of the day in order to ensure that you're getting things accomplished and meeting your goal. So with that in mind, I want to offer something as a thought, and I think that came up with Bill as well. Knowing when you're most alert and attentive, understanding what that time of day looks like for you. And that may be more critical than you could understand. And there's actually an entire process of doing so, and a tested theory. And sleep doctor Michael Bruce talked about it in The Power of When, in the best time to learn something. He talks about the best time to learn something is when your brain is in acquisition mode, usually from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and again from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. And this whole science of good timing is called chronobiology. And if you have a moment, you can check it out. But it's really a phenomenal concept in that really understanding your day and where your peak times of alertness and attentiveness and decision making really lies and how that may impact your scheduling your work. So we talked about what is the best time to learn something new. So if you're taking on a task where there's a new learning experience, having a sense of what time is best for you in the day may be very helpful, as well as what's the best time to make decisions. Because in the process of sorting, you're talking about the decision of, should I keep it or should I discard it? Should I sell it? Should I offer it to a charity? That decision-making process may be critical in terms of how you handle your possessions. So what is the best time to learn to make decisions? According to the best time to make decisions is your cognitive power, when your cognitive powers are strongest. It's 1 to 3 hours after waking up. Has anyone experienced that's the best time? Or sometime in the morning? Are you, I'm a morning person when it comes to making decisions. So that works for me. But understanding that process in terms of timing and, what's the best time of day can be very helpful in determining your energy. So Kimberly said, weird, mine is 2 p.m. to 9 p.m. There you go. For different strokes for different folks. So Morgan says late morning and early evening are best for me. And that's definitely a helpful, to get some clarity around that can be helpful in terms of how you schedule things. Because as you know, we definitely have to figure out what our schedules are for tasks related to organizing and sorting. So here is an example of a weekly calendar that can be used in terms of really laying out what you're going to do specifically on each day. And you may even be able to add the timing. So you really have a concrete guide and a plan to help you move forward in terms of your scheduling. Do you see that as being helpful? Do you see a calendar as helping? And Hillary says, I use something similar. Yes, I know for me, I'm still old school. I still have to write it down somewhere. For some folks, they may even use a phone, their phone calendar, or a calendar on a computer if it's accessible. So there's definitely those options. And yes, someone said an Outlook calendar works just as well. Absolutely, particularly if you are working from home or you're in that kind of mode. Kimberly says, I have 3 calendars. Good for you. Whatever works. So really moving next into the problem solving mode. Because as we know, all great laid plans can encounter some challenges. So really getting a sense as to how do we problem solve when we encounter challenges is going to be critical and important for us to kind of garner as we move through this process. So things won't go exactly as planned. Other problems will compete for your attention, because it's not as though we can just focus on sorting and organizing and the rest of our world disappear and our responsibilities disappear. We have those things prominent in our lives as well. And as we know, the tasks can get frustrating even if we're sorting and organizing. So we really need to get a good grasp of a problem-solving approach that works for us. And there's a number of different problem-solving tools, but there's a problem-solving form that the selection and action plan is one that we recommend and it has been used. So you definitely have the option of looking at the problem-solving tool in that manner. So some of the strategies for problem solving really lays out some clearly established processes, like identifying and defining the problem, because you can't solve the problem if you don't know what the problem is. So really identifying and defining the problem is going to be critical. And we do that by first striving to be as clear and as specific as possible in terms of what the problem is. So it's important to distinguish in terms of a problem that is poorly defined or one that is well defined, because as we define it, we are going to act on it. So in terms of being clear and specific, we have to determine how do we define that problem so that it makes sense to us. And a good example is if you look at, the classic situation when it comes to hoarding, and someone will say, my life has gotten totally out of control. Everything is a mess. Now, that is truly a problem, but defining it that way really puts us in a position where it's very difficult to take action. But if we look at that same concept, how we define a problem, instead of my life has gotten out of control, if we look at it from the perspective of I have too many demands on my time and I can't do them all, it really lends itself to us having a direction as to where we can go. Because if you can't do them all, then you have to attempt to do as much as you can or a specific amount that time and energy and resources offer. So there's some good examples as to how a problem can be well-defined and one can be poorly defined and how it impacts addressing those concerns. A classic example is there just isn't enough space in this place for me to spread out and get fully organized. Defining the problem that way versus defining it as I need to find a way to sort my things in my little apartment. Clearly defined versus not poorly defined. That's going to be imperative in terms of how we approach a problem, how we see a problem, and how we actionalize our movement to addressing that problem. So we need to brainstorm possible solutions and then conceive as many solutions as possible, because we don't want to step in with just one option, because if that doesn't work the first time, it tends to deflate our motivation. So we want to look at as many options for addressing the concerns as we can, and really don't judge them, just get a number of them. Like, the concept of putting up a number of options on the wall, and then we're going to sort through them. So don't worry about evaluating your ideas critically. Just feel free to be creative, and remember, no idea should be considered silly at this point in the process. So if you read the book, you would talk about how Helen saw herself in this mode of brainstorming. She talked about, I can cancel some less important activities that I have planned, or run off to Timbuktu, or ask a friend or family member to help with some tasks. Those were all options for her, and she kept them all in her list of options. Even running off to Timbuktu was an option, and it shouldn't be deemed as silly in that moment. We want to have as many options as possible, and then we sort through them. You want to then consider and select the practical options, and to really evaluate the solutions and select the most realistic and useful ones. Determine which of those possible solutions is feasible. And in that mode, Helen talked, well, running off to Timbuktu was not, as much as it was an option, it wasn't going to be a good long-term solution. But canceling some of her less important activities and focusing on sorting and organizing was a viable one for her. So make sure that you consider all your options and evaluate possible solutions and select the most practical one. And then we talked about when we're uncertain as to what to do, and all that noise is coming at us, and we have all that positive and negative concept in our head. Here's a strategy that has worked for some people and you can consider, which is a cognitive behavior strategy, that real cognitive reconstructing, in terms of what common negative thoughts stop you from trying something new. So you're almost at the bridge of getting started, and then those negative thoughts begin to come into your head. How do you deal with them? We recommend using this cognitive restructuring to really challenge and change those unproductive and unhealthy thoughts that really drive your decision-making or your behavior. So what we do is when those negative thoughts come in, we try to catch it. What is the thought? Why am I thinking that getting started on this sorting is a waste of time? And once we have that concept, we check it. Is it really true? Is it credible and true? Can I not do this? When I've already established a plan, when I've already analyzed all my other challenges, when I have a sense of what the obstacles are, is it true that I can't do this? If the answer is no, then we move from checking it to really changing that thought. What is a more accurate thought and a helpful thought? Okay, this is going to be challenging. This is something I'm doing for the first time. I know quite a few people who have tried and are successful, and some people have not been, but I have my team with me. I know who to call in case I get overwhelmed. I have a plan. I know the time I'm going to put into this. I've already done my practice muscle. I've done this. I've gotten to that 30 minutes, that 40 minutes. I'm confident. So once you catch it, check it, and change it, it then allows you to feel confident and to feel grounded stepping into that mode of making a change. So this is certainly an option, a strategy that you can use when you kind of hit that bump, even before you begin to organize and sort. So just think of it, and that information is available to you. So then once we have the practical options that we've considered, we need to try them, right? Because as we know, if we don't give it a try, just thinking about it is not going to solve the problem. We have to do something about it. And in Helen's case, she talked about listing the things that she required at home and order them in terms of importance. She acknowledged that life will still go on even if she don't finish all the tasks. So really getting yourself grounded and solid in that element in terms of moving into the solution mode. And once we've gotten into that action of trying to sort, we need to take a look at evaluating whether or not it worked. Really getting a sense of, when we tried it, did it work? How do we assess whether or not our efforts work, our first step work? Did that first 5 minutes work? Did that second 10 minutes work? Did we get into that 15 minutes mode? Did that work for us? Was it helpful? Can we see a tangible evidence that we move from a stack of bills to now knowing exactly where our credit card bill is? We have it lined up. We know when it needs to be paid. we have a sense as we have actually accomplished one thing or two things or three things. We have a sense of where we're going. So even along the way, we need to be evaluating our progress. We don't have to, we don't wait until the hour and be like, did we succeed? You do that, it can be challenging. Along the way, we need to evaluate that. And then we get into the actual sorting and organizing. How do we get into that mode and be confident and clear about our expectations and the obstacles and our outcomes? We begin by categorizing possessions as things to keep and things to let go of. That's where we start as a process. We establish some basic categories. And we look at the things to let go of. And as you know, that will be the thing that gives you a hernia, a headache, and a whole lot of angst. But we've already thought about that. We've analyzed that. We know we have too many possessions right now that our space can accommodate, that our life can accommodate, that is actually allowing us to function. So we are really getting into that start of not eliminating, not putting things away, but we are actually looking at how do we then create a functional life that we can feel good about, that we can feel involved in, and we can actually feel lived. And we do that by making some decisions about our possessions as we look at them, right? As we look at them as they are. So the things that we have, we choose to let go of. Do they go into the trash? Do they get recycled? Do we donate them? And in some instances, do we sell? Because some of our possessions, obviously, we know as much as they have value to us, they have value to other folks. And we can potentially get some financial dividends from actually letting go of them. So we're getting, that dual benefit of, creating some viable, useful space in our home, while also potentially getting some financial benefits from making that change. So that's a reward in itself. So making that decision is going to be critical in terms of sorting and organizing. So we always think of maybe that's not the best way to start, right? Maybe letting go is not the first thing we want, the category we want to do. Maybe the category we want to start with is the things we want to save, because it gives us a sense of possession, a sense of being there. So for the things we want to save, that also requires some organization, putting them into categories. And both Bill and Mary looked at really some of the options of how do we categorize things that we want to save. Mail and sorted papers, assorted papers. We know for a number of folks, papers are the hardest thing to go through. So we don't want to discard them before we've kind of gone through that process of determining what's important to us. So we kind of put a category of mail and assorted papers. For some people, they may want to be more specific. They may want to be bills, specific documents, living wills. You may want medical documents. You may want catalogs. You may want whatever way you sort your paper that makes sense to you, maybe the way to put those into categories. For me, I look at mail and assorted papers, because if I go beyond that, I'm gonna get confused and overwhelmed. So I put it into those two categories. Then I look at clothing as another category. Toiletries. You forget how many things you brought home from the hotel, all those little containers. And before you know it, you have boxes and boxes of little shampoos and air conditioner. And I can't use any shampoo and conditioner particularly. So what am I keeping them for, right? So
they are very helpful at the homeless shelters.
Absolutely. So we'll think about donating them in that option. We think about souvenirs, things that you want to hold on to, cleaning supplies. I know for a number of us, cleaning supplies have no definition. They go out a window after a while. It's like, okay, do we go from, what is my cleaning supplies? Does cleaning supplies include only the chemical, or does it include the brush, the rags, all of that stuff? Before you know, it has 10 categories of cleaning supplies. Sometimes you need to simplify it if, you know, too many categories don't work for you. Summer shoes. For me, I've got to do them by season. Summer shoes, winter shoes, flip-flops. I've got to kind of sort them out because I'm into shoes. I would have shoes by colors, shoes by time I bought them, and it would get very confusing. And Sarah Lynn says, the last hotel I stayed at didn't provide small shampoos. I had a fillable container attached to the shower wall. Look at you. That's fantastic. Yes. You got to figure out what works for you. And sometimes you can actually, I know a friend of mine that would actually put them in little baggies and write the specific vacation they're going on and say, I'm taking this with me on vacation, but I'm only going to do so for the rest of the year. So if I'm going on 2 vacations, I have 2 little small baggies with those things in case the hotels don't have them. The rest I can get rid of because I don't have any plan as to what vacations are going to be next year. I may not have hair yet next year, so why am I holding on to these things, right? So we've got to kind of get into that mode. But these are the categories that we need to kind of use.
You got a little typo there on boots.
That's true. Look at that. Yes, indeed. Thanks for the observation. I'll make sure I change that. That's funny. That may be the British boots. You may not know. Got you, right? Indeed. But it's important to really assess and create some categories so it guides you in terms of your sorting and organizing. The things that you're going to let go of. When we think of the things that we're going to let go of in terms of trash, recycle, and donating, I ask people, what category is the most challenging for you? Like I said, for me, footwear is going to be the most challenging to sort.
For me, it's photos. I'm a family historian, and I've got photos from my mother, my father, my grandparents, my brother. Yeah.
I could understand that. That's a challenging one because that takes a lot of time to kind of figure out, you know, where things are in that sense. But
and it's hard to organize them. Like, do I organize them by generations? But then sometimes they're multi-generations in a picture.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could drive myself crazy.
Indeed. And Morgan says clothing and souvenirs. We all got our stitch. We know what our thing is, be kind of organized. And I say, if you get into that category that is the most difficult for you, what's a critical element is to not have a number of categories within that categories. The less categories you have for your problem area, the better it is, because you're able to sort a little easier. You don't want 10 categories in clothing. If clothing is your biggest challenge, you do not want to do that. That's not going to be helpful. It's going to really create a lot of anxiety and angst. So then we look at our general decision-making as we get into this mode of preparing for organizing and sorting. So to decide whether to save or let go of things. So once we've decided what we're saving, we determine the category and we put them into a nearby container once they're in that category. And then we move the sorted items to a temporary location and then move them to a final location. If you have the room and the option, it is better to move it directly to the final location the minute you sort it and move on. But if that's not the case, you can have a temporary place removed from where you're sorting. So the temporary place should be somewhere removed from where you're actually doing the sorting and organizing, because as you know, you look at it 3 times, it's going to go back into the pile, right? And you do not want to do that. So you move it out, put it into a temporary situation. The things that you're letting go, you determine the category: trash, recycle, donate, and sell. And you can actually create containers for each one of those categories, and you move it to that location. In some instances, we say, if you're going to trash it, don't keep it in that room. Or don't keep it. If you're going to trash it, the minute you decide it's going to be trash and you compile it, move it to the trash. Same with recycle. Move it to the recycle bin. Don't keep the recycle parcel in a corner because it's going to slip down by wind or by effort, right? You move it actually to the recycling box in itself. Same goes for things that you're going to donate. If you're going to donate it to loved ones, families, or friends, you put it in a separate box from those you're going to donate to Goodwill or donate to the veterans, because you don't want to get, first thing you don't want to have is a family member coming over, going through your Goodwill stuff for stuff that you have designated and allocated for them. You want to make sure that people are not messing up your flow as well, or questioning your decision-making or judgment or categories. It's critical because you've made this plan. This plan is germane to you. As much as you need support, you don't need 15 voices telling you what's the right category. So that's a critical element. And basically having the resources to make those decisions. Find your local resources. Your local recycling center. If you are not certain about it, there's 1-800-RECYCLE that will actually, you put in your zip code and it can give you some options. The same with earth911.com. That will help you find local or proximal recycling centers. There's charities that will pick up. Goodwill will pick up. Salvation Army will pick up, and some other options, some local charities. And a note of essence here, be careful determining that something has to go to a specific charity and you're holding on to it until you're able to access them. That can be 3 months, 6 months down the road. If you've decided to donate it and your preferred charity is not available to you in terms of pickup, move it into the next option. I want to kind of make sure you get it. So have 3 or 4 options of pickup for charities and move it. If your preferred option, don't think, move it to the second option. So because you want to be moving along, you don't want to hold things in lieu of some connecting with a charity that you prefer. And selling your goods. There's a million ways of selling your goods. From Craigslist to eBay to Facebook Marketplace. That's going to be helpful. One of the things that you have to be very careful with is if you know it's not helpful to you to go to a swap meet or a barter place. Do not take those items that you have that you're going to sell to that swap meet or that barter place, because the likelihood is that you'll be coming back with what? More than you left with. So when we make the decision to organize here, we're making a decision that's a final decision that is tangible, that you're moving on from. You don't want to be, going back and forth. So avoid the swap meet and the places if you want to sell things. Or the guy that is going to pull up with the truck full of stuff to buy your stuff. You know that guy in the rural neighborhoods that pull up with his truck full of stuff that is antique/junk to buy your stuff. And then he's inviting you to come outside to see what he has while you're trying to sell it. That does not work. So if that's a challenge for you, that's something to avoid. So really getting into that, knowing your resources, having them available to you while you're moving in that process. With Bill had that preparing for organizing form that was helpful. He talked about where you're going to do your specific sorting and organizing, the target area of the type of object around, a specific area, and the things you need to do for organizing. You need to prepare for organizing. In Bill's case, he had to rent a dumpster, get a box of plastic garbage bags, buy labels, markers, whatever you need in terms of your planning for organizing. This form is very helpful to do that in terms of getting you organized. So certainly make the most of that form. So giving special attention to paper items, because we've talked about that earlier. Paper is a demon. It's a monster. And it's the biggest challenge for most of us. And I can tell you, even folks who don't acknowledge or recognize that they have hoarding issues have issues with paper product and paper stuff. It's just monstrous. it's a societal monster that is created for us that we sometimes have to wade through. But really organizing your papers according to general categories is going to help you in that sorting and organizing process. From financial paperwork to correspondence, just letters or whatever that is important to you. Some people, magazines, catalogs, whatever. Medical paperwork. You don't want your, I think of myself, I'm always very careful now that they have, like if you do an MRI or something like that, they can give you on a disc. But some of us old school are like, no, I don't trust that stuff. I want the paperwork too, right? So you're holding on to 3 discs and 5 reams of paper around one MRI. You've got to think about it in terms of, does that make sense? Do you then, and in some instances, we've looked at folks who had a trusted person who supports them in their medical care, and they said, I'm going to keep the disc, but I can give that person, a copy of the paperwork to hold on to in case they have to make that decision. And that may be able to go into PDF or a folder, as opposed to just a piece of hard copy. So you have to look at some of those options. Now you need to make sure that your taxes, you're holding on to your tax paperwork. You don't want to have that in your pile that you're trying to sort, because that can be challenging. And then really determining how long should you hold on to some of your paper. For a lot of people, that's a very difficult decision, but there's a guide that helps folks really determine how long you should hold on to certain paperwork. And certainly having a sense of the resources you need, whether it's filing cabinets, filing folders, labels, pencils, things to mark things down, they're critical. But how long to hold on to safe papers? Credit cards, receipts, the recommendations that you should hold on to them for a month because they go in monthly cycles. Paycheck stubs, 1 year, because if typically you're asked to produce your pay stubs, it's classically going to go over a year. And your W-2s or your 1099s, you should hold on to those for at least 6 years, because God forbid you have an IRS audit, you want 6 years of your W-2s. So make sure that you have a sense of those timelines. So I'm hoping that that's helpful if you're trying to sort your paper and get a sense as to what I should hold on to, how long should I hold on to them to make sense. So that's helpful in that sense.
What are some ideas for people who might be more low income? Like, because I know, like, if, like, I'm thinking of filing cabinets, right? Because those, you can get some really nice filing cabinets, but they can be really pricey.
Yeah.
So what are some other options for people that may not be able to afford like nice filing cabinets?
And I can tell you one option that allows you to get cheap filing cabinets is Habitat for Humanity. They oftentimes have a lot of offices and so forth that actually change their stuff. They tend to pass it on to Habitat for Humanity, and you can go there and sometimes get 4 of them for $20 or something like that. A next option certainly is for folks, I would say, and it's different for different people. For me, I've seen it helpful for folks to get to those plastic containers that are often sold at Walmart or so forth, but the low profile ones that you can just slide on their bed. So they're relatively low profile, and some of them actually have compartments, so you can use plastic stuff to create compartments. So you can catalog them in that single container. You can put all it and just move it onto the bed. Yeah. So it's easily accessible, single access.
Also, like square milk crates. They're plastic, and they really hold perfectly hanging file folders in them. Correct. So I've seen people use those.
So there's a number of different options, and I suggest with people, if you have options that put it in the chat, share it. We can certainly take a look at it, but those are some of the options that I think about.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Katie was kind of thinking of the same thing I was. She said every office she's worked at in the last 15 years has downsized paperwork and donated filing cabinets to Habitat.
Absolutely, yeah. They're a good resource. I just say to folks, if you know you have a challenge in terms of exposure to that stuff, go with a person that's going to help keep you on task. Because you can go to Habitat for Humanity and come back. The good thing is that some of the stuff is so large you can't drag it in a car, but if you need an escort to someone to really keep you focused in here, we're going there for filing cabinets. You're not going for the 35th lamp, right? You're going for filing cabinets. Let's focus on that. That can also be helpful, where you use your natural supports. So putting things in their designated places. As we know, we can sort and catalog and organize stuff, but making sure that we put things in a designated place. There's a rule of thumb, and it was great. I love it. This was the best rule of thumb that I saw that was helpful to me and a number of folks. It's 4 simple rules. If you take it out, put it back. If you open it, close it. If you basically throw it down, pick it up. And if you take it off, hang it up. It's like your grandma's rules, right? It's very basic, very simple. It really helps you stay focused. I have suggested to folks, take this stuff, put it right on your refrigerator, and you see it there. Those are the rules. As they say, them are the rules. A simple guide, not complicated, right in front of you, keeps you focused. Ultimately, though, once we have gone through that process, we've categorized things, we've put them in place, we've determined whether we're going to keep them, whether we're going to let them go, sell them, recycle, we've made those decisions. We have come a far way. It is time for some rewards. We need to keep ourselves motivated and constantly enthused about what we're doing, because this is a marathon. So we need to make sure that we're providing those rewards along the way. What's important now is that only after you have sorted and organized for the designated amount of time do you then give yourself that reward. Because those rewards need to be tangible and clear in terms of what you've accomplished. Because yes, we can reward ourselves every 15 minutes along the way. It loses the oomph, it loses that value. So it's important that those rewards come subsequent to having completed a session of sorting and organizing. And as we talked about it, you responded in the poll, those rewards help keep us motivated, incentivize us to keep moving along that process, and help us sustain the change behavior. So that's critical that we make sure that we have the rewards. And there's a whole theory on incentive theory that really encapsulates the whole concept. But for me, I think there is no greater sense of you finish organizing, you know, for that session that day. A rocky road reward is a phenomenal thing. I don't look like you don't know what I'm talking about when I say rocky road. Or you can go, you can go vanilla if you want, but for me, it's all rocky road. I finished that session. I'm gonna scoop into that container and get myself an ice cream reward. So whatever works for you, it really helps incentivize your efforts. And we've seen the evidence that those kinds of tangible rewards after an accomplished task really keeps people motivated and sustained. So that's the critical part, ultimately. So what rewards work for you? Because like I said, it's all rocky road for me.
For me, it's just the feeling of accomplishment.
Okay. See, that's what we call it, that star in your head, right? That sense of I've accomplished it. For different folks, it may be different.
And I feel much calmer and relaxed. And
yeah. I know some folks who reward themselves actually by the space that they have cleared out. Some folks take a chalk and just draw
Like,
right
okay,
on that
I worry
space.
about you. Like you said, you're gonna get home
Define
tonight,
that
and she's where it
space
is tonight.
to show themselves that that is
Like,
now
yeah,
a free
just
space to
one night. And I was
occupy.
like, you have an erase
For some
device. You
people,
can, like, just
even
send me
prior to
stupid
the commencement of this stuff,
stuff up and down.
they have a
Like, why would
specific,
I? Like, just don't call search and rescue.
Morgan,
yeah,
Morgan, you need to mute. Oh, thank you.
thank you. Very good. So it's in that sense that we look at what we do as a tangible way of really empowering ourselves to live the life we want to live, because that's the ultimate goal. It's not just about moving stuff and sorting stuff and making our home, look decent and organized. It's about allowing us to function and live the way we want to live in our domain, in our home, our safe space. So that's a critical element of it in terms of ensuring that we are rewarding ourselves. So I know we've done a lot today. I know there's a lot coming at you, but I'm definitely glad that we're now moving into that action phase where we're going to see some dividends from what we're doing. If you have the opportunity, I'd like you to take a few moments and do the evaluation. And Emily, just put the evaluation in the chat if you can. And while you're taking that, I want us to look at, and as we know, what we're assigned to do is really do a learning application. So we want to take what we've practiced, what we've talked about, and put it into action between now and our next meeting. So I want you to try or share the My Categories and Locations form. So once we categorize things and the location is a form that we can use to really help us organize that. My preparation for organizing forms, and you saw Bill's plan, really helping yourself or the person that you're supporting in that element, use that form. And my rewards form, there's actually a form that establishes clearly what rewards you're going to establish for accomplishing the goal of organizing and sorting. And then we hopefully at our next meeting, we get a chance to talk about how helpful those forms were, how challenging they were, and how do you see yourself using them. For those who are not familiar, next meeting, it's on Tuesday, the 27th, September 27th, same time, same place, same lovely folks, same phenomenal subject we'll be discussing, but we'll be talking really about the action phase of the sorting plan. So we'll talk about let's go, getting into that action of making it happen. So here's an opportunity certainly for if you have any questions, if there's anything that you think that was critical that we talked about or need to talk about, I'd certainly like to take an opportunity, but I want to respect and honor your time. But at the same time, I want to thank you so much for today, for your engagement, for your taking the time away from your busy schedule to engage with us. I know that this is a really meaningful and tangible learning community, and I want to make sure that we are respecting that, and we are making the most of the efforts of everyone involved, and we're sharing as much as we can, because it takes a village to get this done. I can assure you, it takes a lot of hands and heads to put this together. So any questions, certainly feel free to shoot me a question, but if you have a moment, take the evaluation so we get some feedback, because we always in the mode of figuring out how we can make this more feasible and practical for you to apply. How did it work best for you? So please do so. But I am going to end the recording, and we can certainly take a few moments if you have questions.